Okay, everyone, welcome to Bible study this week. We're taking on our second week of Genesis part 2, and this one is the second half of Abraham's story. So I feel like I want to just do a little kind of trigger warning. There's some content in the stuff we're going to take on, both for Hagar and we're going into Sodom and Gomorrah today. So,
I've seen worse on television.
Full disclosure, there's some hard stories about to come. There's a lot of hard stories in general in Genesis. So we're taking them, we're breaking them apart, we're finding the context. We're undoing those layers of teachings and finding the root of the story. So good to have you all here today. Any questions before I start on anything last week? Go ahead, Tony.
Okay. After reading our reading for today, Abraham and Isaac did what religion? They were Jews. Okay.
No, that's not the complete question.
Okay.
That is correct. They were Jews. Abraham is the father of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And we're going to talk about the Islam part today.
Okay. And then
Isaac. Yeah, Isaac.
Okay.
Christians and Jews believe Isaac is the rightful heir of Abraham and do not recognize Ishmael, who we're going to meet this week.
Okay.
Muslims do not recognize Isaac as the rightful heir. They view that Ishmael is the rightful heir of Abraham.
Okay. That's Muslims.
Correct.
And then Lot.
So Lot is Abraham's nephew. We met him last week. So Lot left with Abraham when Abraham heard God's call. And then what happened last week was they had to split up because they basically were running out of resources and land. So Lot went one way and Abraham went the other way. And then Lot got in trouble last week. And so Abraham became that kind of like Marvel warrior and stepped in and freed Lot. So we covered that last week. And then this week, we're going to deal with Lot in Sodom and Gomorrah.
And then what religion is related to Lot?
So Lot is going to be on the Jewish side.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, Shirley. Hi, Marie.
Thank you. I had to get them to right.
That's okay. That's okay. It's a lot of genealogy, and out of this genealogy is going to spring a lot of stories we're still living out today. Anybody else have any questions from last week? Okay, let's dive in. Mabel is snoring very loud today, so just know you're gonna be hearing her. Okay, this week we're taking on Genesis 16 to 19, second part of Abraham's story. So here's what happened last week. Abraham headed into Canaan. Remember, he started down in Babylon. And then famine hit, so he took his family to Egypt, lied to protect himself, got rich, and left town. He split up with Lot. Lot went one way, he went the other way, and then he came to Lot's defense when Lot was captured. And then at the end, we saw that covenant with God occurring, which we're going to revisit again today, right? Okay, so let's go into one of the harder stories, which is the story of Hagar. Would somebody like to read that? Go ahead, Tony.
Now Sarah, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, but she had an Egyptian slave named Hagar. So she said to Abram, "The Lord has kept me from having children. Go, sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her." Abram agreed to what Sarah said. So after Abram had been living in Canaan 10 years, Sarah, his wife, took her Egyptian slave Hagar and gave her to her husband to be his wife. He slept with Hagar and she conceived. When she knew she was pregnant, she began to despise her mistress. When Sarah said to Abram, "You are responsible for the wrong I am suffering. I put my slave in your arms, and now she knows she is pregnant, and she despises me. May the Lord judge between you and me. Your slave is in your hands, Abram said. Do with her whatever you think best. Then Sarah mistreated Hagar, so she fled from her. And the angel of the Lord found Hagar near the spring in the desert. It was the spring that is beside the road to Shur. And he said, Hagar, slave of Sarah, where have you come from, and where are you going? I'm running away from my mistress Sarah, she said. Then the angel of the Lord told her, go back to your mistress and submit to her. The angel added, I will increase your descendants so much that they will be too numerous to count. She gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her. You are the God who sees me, for she said, I have now seen the one who sees me. That is why the well was called Bir Lahai Roy. It is still there between Kadesh and Beren. So Hagar bore Adam a son, and Hagar gave the name Ishmael to the son she had born. Abraham was 86 years old when Hagar bore him Ishmael.
Thanks, Tony. Okay, so this last section is the rationale for why Muslims look to Abraham as the father of their religion. Abraham has made the covenant with God, and his first son is Ishmael. So that's where Muslims are going to draw that connection through Hagar. So it's a tough one, right? So the chapter is going to start. There is still no child. Abraham's been promised this child. His descendants are going to number the stars, right? So Sarah takes matters into her own hands with Plan B. This was pretty common in ancient times, where surrogates were used to ensure descendants. So Sarah is not doing anything that isn't really out of historical context here. God never told Abram who the mother was going to be, just that Abraham was going to be the father, right? But in going down this path, both Sarai and Abram really become the oppressors of this really marginalized poor girl here, right? Hagar is going to experience at their hands slavery. She was probably one of the commodities that was given to Abram coming out of Egypt. Poverty, rape, domestic violence, homelessness, motherhood, and also radical encounters with God through it all, right? So the Hebrew word to describe Hagar is shapah, which means a virgin slave girl. That's what that word means. She is forced to have sex with Abram, and then she is beaten by Sarai, and she runs away. So biblical commentators, and y'all have heard me preach on Hagar before probably, but biblical commentators for years have tasked Hagar as the one doing the wrongdoing in this sermon. A lot of derision at Hagar, a lot of blame. She is not viewed well in the biblical commentaries. But what happens is Hagar in the wilderness is going to meet God, and Hagar is going to do something that no other person in the Bible has done yet. Hagar is going to name God. And so in ancient customs, only the superior was able to name those who were lower standing. So this is pretty revolutionary what Hagar does here. She names God, and she names God the God who sees. Now, God does a pretty awful thing, though. God sends her back. But God makes a promise that her descendants will be so many to come, and tells her what to name that boy, Ishmael. Ishmael means God hears. That is the meaning behind God hears. So that is, again, how we end up with the tie through Islam to Abraham through Ishmael. Okay, so let's talk about what happens next with Abraham. Because now we're going to see the switching. We're going to have another covenant story, And we're going to get to Paul's question from last week with the names. So will someone read this one? Go ahead, Chris. Thank you. Oh, you're on mute, Chris.
Okay. When Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to him and said, I am God Almighty. Walk before me faithfully and be blameless. Then I will make my covenant between me and you and will greatly increase your numbers. Abram fell face down, and God said to him, As for me, this is my covenant with you. You will be the father of many nations. No longer will you be called Abram, your name will be Abraham. For I have made you a father of many nations. I will make you very fruitful. I will make nations of you, and kings will come from you. I will establish my covenant as an everlasting covenant between me and you and your descendants after you for the whole land of Canaan, where you now reside as a foreigner. I will give as an everlasting possession to you and your descendants after you, and I will be their God. Then God said to Abraham, As for you, you must keep my covenant, you and your descendants after you for the generations to come. This is my covenant with you and your descendants after you, the covenant you are to keep. Every male among you shall be circumcised. Hello.
Thank you, Chris.
Oh,
Okay. So let me just stop it sharing for a second and tell you a story. When I was about 16, I became a part of kind of this really radical Catholic youth organization, very evangelical, like you can find evangelical Catholicism. And very much Jesus died for our sins, and very oddly for Catholicism, biblical based. So we all walked around with our Bibles, and they told us we had to read the Bible from the beginning to the end. And so I picked up my Bible like the good little rabid Catholic girl that I was, and I could not make it through Genesis because it didn't make sense. I was like, wait, didn't we already do this? I'm so confused. So a 16-year-old set adrift in the Bible and told to read it from start to finish. I didn't get through Genesis. I got stuck in Genesis because I kept thinking, wait, didn't we already do this? Oh, so yes, we already did this. So is God making a new covenant? Probably not. Here's what I did not know at the time, which is Genesis is written by a whole lot of different people, right? So think of Genesis less as a book written by somebody as a library of stories put together to tell this big arc of the story of the patriarchs, the second half, right? So like, remember at the beginning, there were two stories of the creation, two different writers. Genesis isn't a beginning to end. It's more of like a library where a lot of people threw in stories. And I wish there could be a disclaimer like that. And I mean, that would have really helped my 16-year-old confusion. Okay, so it's probably a different writer. This is a covenant that's going to be sealed through circumcision, a mark that is on only the male bodies. There's no discussion about how women enter into the covenant. I always assumed this was some new radical custom. It actually wasn't. It was a practice that was customary among ancient Egyptians and Western Semites. Circumcision is not a new idea in practice. God is not doing something new here. What's different is circumcision is going to be applied to Abraham's people. It is going to become then the mark of Judaism among men only, as a sign of Jewish identity. And for all of you who took the Paul class, you know that this is going to cause big problems after Jesus with the early Christians. So this is the circumcision. Oops, sorry. There we go. Okay. So, and that's when God's going to rename Abram to Abraham, and now he's going to rename Sarah, and he's going to renew that covenant. So will somebody read this one? This is the second part of, again, the same covenant story, different writer.
I will.
Thanks, Diane.
God also said to Abraham, as for Sarah, your wife, you are no longer to call her Sarai. Her name will be Sarah. I will bless her and will surely give you a son by her. I will bless her so that she will be the mother of nations. Kings of peoples will come from her. Abraham fell face down. He laughed and said to himself, will a son be born to a man 100 years old? Will Sarah bear a child at the age of 90? And Abraham said to God, if only Ishmael might live under your blessing. Then God said, yes, but your wife Sarah will bear you a son, and you will call him Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his descendants after him. As for Ishmael, I have heard you. I will surely bless him. I will make him fruitful and will greatly increase his numbers. He will be the father of 12 rulers, and I will make him into a great nation. But my covenant I will establish with Isaac, whom Sarah will bear to you by this time next year. When he had finished speaking with Abraham, God went up from him.
Okay, so again, this is why Christians and Jews follow the Abraham line, because this story appears now after Ishmael's been born. I have to think it's not a coincidence. There's a story added here after Ishmael's born saying, but wait, the real child is coming, the one who's going to be the covenant bearer. So, so the covenant is through Sarah's womb. Sarah is going to birth the nation. And all of this is going to occur without Sarah being involved in the conversation. So all these conversations are between God and Abram. So at this point in time, and this goes back to Paul, your question last week, Sarah and Abraham's names are changed, and that signifies this special destiny that's been called. So there's a pre and a post. But again, remember, there's not one writer here, there's multiple writers. It's not a new covenant, it's somebody new telling the story of the covenant. Okay, and then this we're gonna, let me go back and see what I put in here. Oh, this is about God coming. This is actually a pretty important one. So would somebody read this one?
I could read.
Go ahead, Marie.
The Lord appeared to Abraham near the great trees of Mamre while he was sitting at the entrance to his tent in the heat of the day. Abraham looked up and saw 3 men standing nearby. When he saw them, he hurried from the entrance of his tent to meet them and bowed low to the ground. He said, if I have found favor in your eyes, and my Lord, do not pass your servant by. Let a little water be brought, and then you may all wash your feet and rest under this tree. Let me get you something to eat, so you can be refreshed and then go on your way, now that you have come to your servant. Very well, they answered, do as you say. So Abraham hurried into the tent to Sarah. Quick, he said, get 3 shears of the finest flour and knead it and bake some bread. Then he ran to the herd and selected a choice tender calf and gave it to the servant, who hurried to prepare it. He then brought some curds and milk and the calf that had been prepared and set these before them. While they ate, he stood near them under a tree. Where is your wife Sarah? They asked him. There in the tent, he said. Then one of them said, I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, will have a son.
Thanks, Marie. Okay, so there's these 3 strangers, right? And this is actually important because there's God and 2 angels. Those 2 angels are the ones that we're going to meet who run afoul of the people of Sodom and Gomorrah. So this is the start of those three showing up. And at first, Abraham doesn't recognize God, and he jumps into action. And in ancient Bedouin culture, transforms the strangers into guests. So he prepares a feast, orders Sarah to make the bread and the cakes. And this is a central tenet, not only of his culture and his context, but also of his story. Throughout Abraham's story, he's been an alien in a foreign land. And this hospitality for the stranger is going to be central to him. It is going to continue to be a central feature as we move forward, because remember, this isn't just Abraham's story of being an alien in a foreign land. This is going to become Israel's story of being an alien in a foreign land. So much of these stories are going to inform over centuries of how Israel will behave in a foreign land. And hospitality is going to be one of those key tenets. Okay, so we don't have to read this one, but this is the one where Sarah's listening, and Sarah hears this and just starts laughing because it's preposterous. And God says, why is she laughing, right? Well, because she's old. And she says, I didn't laugh. And then he says, yeah, you really did laugh. Now, it has been 25 years in biblical years since God made this first promise to Abraham, and there's been no son, right? And so Sarah's gotten desperate. She's had Abraham get Hagar pregnant. This is the moment where, with Sarah's laughter, the name Isaac will come out, and Isaac is going to mean laughter. So that's going to tie back to this story right now, of Sarah's laughing at the preposterousness of her being able to have a child, and that child will be named Isaac Laughter. So remember last week, the fundamental question of Genesis and Abraham's story is, can Abraham trust God, and can God be trusted? So God has yet to deliver on the promise. So, and Sarah is definitely struggling with that promise. Okay, now we're going to go into the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. And this is a hard story. And maybe before we start it, let me just stop for a second here. So let's talk about what do you know about Sodom and Gomorrah? First things that come to mind on this story.
Bad people did bad things.
Bad people. What else?
What they did, just bad.
Yeah.
Fire and brimstone.
Fire and brimstone.
They were ungodly.
They were ungodly.
And this is where Lot's wife doesn't follow directions and is turned into a pillar of salt because she looks back.
Yep.
Right.
So she doesn't follow directions. Yep. What else?
And then there's that whole discussion about, well, are you going to destroy the whole city because there's a few bad people? And how many bad people do there have to be?
Yep.
How many good people do there have to be before you won't destroy everybody?
Yep. Sodom and Gomorrah, this is the story. Sodom is the where sodomite comes from for male homosexuality. The Sodom laws are all drawing from this name because of the perception that the core sin is homosexuality. And that's why God destroyed.
Where do they get that from?
We're going to talk a little bit about that, but that's where sodomites come from. That's where the name derives from, is this biblical story. And if you put Sodom and Gomorrah and gay in your Google bar, you can find some pretty interesting stories, memes, videos about what Christian conservatives view this story as the rationale for God destroying anything to do with homosexuality. One of the ones I almost cut it and put it in was God raining fire and brimstone on Sodom and Gomorrah, and then the caption saying, San Francisco's next, God's coming. So there's a lot of beliefs that Christian conservatives in particular tie to this story about homosexuality.
My question is that written anywhere? Where is that written?
We're gonna show you that. I'm gonna show
Okay.
you. Okay, so let's take the story on and actually go to the story. And I think when you find somebody who's gonna say, well, Sodom and Gomorrah, that's how, that's when God killed the city because there were gay people, and there are people who believe that. Very few of them have actually read the story. So let's go ahead and read the story. Somebody want to start with the first section?
I will.
Okay, thank you.
Then the Lord said, the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is so great, and their sin is so grievous, that I will go down and see if what they have done is as bad as the outcry that has reached me. If not, I will know. The men turned away and went toward Sodom, but Abraham remained standing before the Lord. Then Abraham approached him and said, will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked? What if there are 50 righteous people in the city? Will you really sweep it away and not spare the place for the sake of the 50 righteous people in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to kill the righteous with the wicked, treating the righteous and the wicked alike. Far be it from you. Will not the judge of all the earth do right? Did you want me to continue? The Lord said, if I find 50 righteous people in the city of Sodom, I will spare the whole place for their sake. Then Abraham spoke up again. Now that I've been so bold as to speak to the Lord, though I am nothing but dust and ashes, what if the number of the righteous is 5 less than 50? Will you destroy the whole city for lack of 5 people? Then he said, may the Lord not be angry, but let me speak for once more. What if only 10 can be found there? He answered, for the sake of 10, I will not destroy it. When the Lord had finished speaking with Abraham, he left, and Abraham returned home.
Okay, so we find out that these 3 showed up, 1 for God to talk to Abraham about the covenant, but 2 is they heard that things are pretty bad in Sodom and Gomorrah. So the 2 who, remember, 3 showed up at Abraham's tent, 2 are going to go on their way to Sodom and Gomorrah. And then Abraham and God are going to have this dialogue about basically what to do about them. So this is the first time in the Bible we see God taking sides, and God has heard the outcry of the cities oppressed. Now, Abraham, God's faithful covenant partner, is going to plead with God on behalf of the unfaithful. And Abraham's questioning God's sense of judgment. So here's what he's asking. Is judgment communal? Is guilt collective? How significant is the minority? That's what Abraham's pushing God on. And God isn't angered by these questions. So this is not the pre-flood God that Noah dealt with or that Adam and Eve dealt with. This is, this is the God who's willing to save a city from destruction if it means saving a small number of innocents. Remember what happened in the flood? God looked around and said, no, you're all going. This is Abraham pleading with God, arguing with God, and changing God's mind. And we find a different sort of God who's going to prefer to save than to punish. This is also, you all have heard me go on and on about process theology. In process theology, God is not static. God changes. And this is an example of God changing. God changes God's mind. Okay, so then they're gonna arrive in the city. They're gonna arrive in Sodom. So I'll read this one. The two angels arrived at Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gateway of the city. When he saw them, he got up to meet them and bowed down with his face to the ground. My lords, he said, please turn aside to your servant's house. You can wash your feet and spend the night and then go on your way early in the morning. No, they answered, we'll spend the night in the square. But he insisted so strongly that they did go with him and entered his house. He prepared a meal for them, baking bread without yeast, and they ate. Before they'd gone to bed, all the men from every part of the city of Sodom, both young and old, surrounded the house. They called to Lot, where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us so that we can have sex with them. Lot went outside to meet them and shut the door behind him and said, no, my friends, don't do this wicked thing. Look, I have 2 daughters who have never slept with a man. Let me bring them out to you, and you can do with them what you like. But don't do anything to these men, for they have come under the protection of my roof. Get out of your way, they replied. This fellow came here as a foreigner, and now he wants to play the judge. We'll treat you worse than them. They kept bringing pressure on Lot and moved forward to break down the door. Okay, so these are the same 2 angels, right? They were with God. They went into Sodom, and Lot takes them into their home, showing them hospitality. And this angry crowd shows up to rape the men. And instead, Lot is going to offer his virgin daughters that they can rape them instead, right? There's not a lot redeeming in this story. Okay, what is the actual sin of Sodom?
Right.
And so I think it was Chris, you asked, where do you get the fact that Sodom ties to homosexuality? It's because of the sexual assault that the men threatened against the 2 angels. Not about that Lot offers up his 2 daughters. Okay. So for years, it's been assumed that it was sexuality. Early rabbinical writings attest that throughout early Judaism, there has been no link. So this is a Jewish text. Jews had it for hundreds of years before Christianity took it on. For hundreds of years, there was no link between Sodom's sin and homosexuality. It was centuries after Christ that connection is going to be made. The prophets are going to write that the sin is oppressing the needy and crushing the poor. So the sin was lack of justice done in the name of the society's dispossessed and vulnerable, not showing hospitality to those residing on the margins. That was the sin that God had heard about, and God and Abraham were arguing about, and why the angels head to Sodom. It was not taking care of the most vulnerable society, the orphan, the widows, and the aliens. That's what was the sin, not the behavior of the men that came to crash down the door. That's why they originally showed up. That was what they were there for. Okay, so, oh, go ahead, Paul. Let me stop sharing for a second. We're going to get to the part where God destroys the city.
It's
now.
Marilee, Paul, not Paul.
Oh, go ahead, Marilee.
I thought the sin was that they, the people that came to the house, that those men were under the other guy's protection because of the ancient law of, hospitality. That's what I thought the sin was.
And that's definitely one that you could absolutely see, that it is a story of hospitality, and the hospitality is broken. But remember, they showed up. God and the 2 angels showed up to go to Sodom to check it out because they had heard things were bad there.
Mhm.
That's why they were there. That's why God and Abraham were arguing, was way before that instance of what happened with Lot at the door.
And your reading said they wanted to have sex with them. The reading in my Bible doesn't say that at all. So when was that added?
So that's in the NSRV. So which version are you using?
I don't have it here. It's upstairs. I think it's the New Revised Version. No,
Yeah.
It doesn't say that.
Let me pull up the NSRB and we'll get it. What's the citation? Which chapter is that one in? Can someone tell me real quick? Genesis. Oh, I could probably get it. 19.
19, about 7 or 8.
I think it says something like they have their way with them or something, but that
Yeah.
doesn't.
The NRSV is the NSRV is they called to Lot, where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us so we can have sex with them. Now let me just put in, because I know Bernie's a big fan of the King James Version.
I
So the King-
I have the Knox version, which
Yep.
goes back probably 61 years. And it says, bring them out here to minister to our lust.
The King James says, bring them out to us so we may know them carnally.
Oh,
Yeah.
Go look at mine. Mine didn't say that. So
Mhm. The NSRV is bring them out to us so that we may know them.
yeah.
Yeah.
Why aren't we concerned about the daughters?
Right. Yeah, there's a bigger issue.
Totally irrelevant, truly.
Okay, let's go back and take the next story to the next step. Okay, by the time Lot reached Zoar, the sun had risen over the land. Then the Lord rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens. Thus he overthrew those cities and the entire plain, destroying all those living in the cities and also the vegetation in the land. But Lot's wife looked back and she became a pillar of salt. Early the next morning, Abraham got up and returned to the place where he had stood before the Lord. He looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah, toward all the land of the plain, and he saw dense smoke rising from the land like smoke from a furnace. So when God destroyed the cities of the plain, he remembered Abraham and he brought Lot out of the catastrophe that overthrew the cities where Lot had lived.
What?
Yeah, okay, let's talk it through. So, God remembers God's promise to Abraham that he's going to save, the righteous. So he's going to get Lot and his family out here. So the theological claim here is that God, as consuming fire, intervenes in human history to punish evil. So a lot of people who will say, oh my gosh, the Hebrew Bible, it's the Old Testament, it's so dark and twisted, and God, that's not a God I can get behind. This is one of those stories, right? What's lost is that the base of the story is that God stands in solidarity with the poor and the alien and will not forever tolerate injustice. So that's the piece that gets lost if we just look at that destruction in the story. I want to talk about Lot's wife. So she looks back and she is turned into a pillar of salt. So she's a nameless biblical woman. She's been viewed throughout history as vain, materialistic, and getting what she deserved. She is not viewed favorably throughout history. Ancient texts are going to write about her unwillingness to leave Sodom. And she kind of represented all of those who were caught up in the evil that they just couldn't let go of. None of that is in the story that you saw, right? All that's in the story, she turned around. But there's a ton of misunderstanding about Lot's wife. So in the Gospel of Luke, Jesus is going to say, remember Lot's wife. And that's going to make a reference to someone who sought the pleasures of this world and wasn't willing to leave them behind. So even by the New Testament time, these kind of stigmas about Lot's wife had been formed. So again, just to be clear, there's nothing there, right? There's nothing there. But Lot's wife looked back and she became a pillar of salt. So just Lot's wife is a good example of how the stories that can grow up from biblical narratives and what can be done on them have very little to do with what's in the biblical narrative. And then I want to share with you something really, really fascinating, a really fascinating quote of a different perspective of Lot's wife. And this would be from the voice of Lot's wife. I look back at all that I had left behind, my other daughter's grave, my friends and relatives, my home with its cherished mementos, my childhood, and I wept. And so hot was the desert sun and the brimstone torching Sodom that my flowing tears dried instantly, turning me into a pillar of salt. So just a different way into Lot's wife's story.
My Bible had a note that just says, this is how they explain all the pillars of salt around Sodom and Gomorrah.
You
It's a
do.
story
You
that's like,
do.
plain
But
old-
there's a whole narrative about this woman, right?
Yeah,
Okay, so we're not done yet with Lot and his twisted family. So I want to finish up there real briefly. Lot and his two daughters left Zoar and settled in the mountains, for he was afraid to stay in Zoar. He and his two daughters lived in a cave. One day the older daughter said to the younger, our father's old, there's no man around here to give us children, as is the custom all over the earth. Let's get our father to drink wine and then sleep with him and preserve our family line through our father. That night they got their father to drink wine, and the older daughter went in and slept with him. He was not aware of it when she lay down or when she got up. The next day, the older daughter said to the younger, last night I slept with my father. Let's get him to drink wine again tonight, and you go in and sleep with him so we could preserve the family line through our father. So they got their father to drink wine that night also, and the younger daughter went in and slept with him. Again, he was not aware. So both Lot's daughter became pregnant by their father. These are also unnamed women here, right? These are the two women that Lot had offered up to the crowd to be raped instead of the visitors, right? So they had seen their whole world kind of consumed, including their mom, right? So they had lost everything. And they saw themselves as the Earth's sole survivors, and so they hatched this plan to get pregnant by their father. Both of these daughters are going to give birth to sons whose names will become nations who will war against Israel in the centuries to come. So remember, this isn't just Abraham and his descendant story. This is the story of Israel. So all of Israel's enemies are going to have backstories that are pretty awful. And so this isn't just the story of Lot's daughters, it's the story of their offspring who will become Israel's enemies, right? Okay. Let's do a little discussion. I want to be able to send you out for a lot. There are some hard stories in this section about the women. We've got Hagar and how she was treated. We have Sarah and how she was treated. We got Lot's wife. We got Lot's daughters. The question is there a thread to these stories? And can we find God moving in those stories? So I want you to think about the women that you encountered in these stories. And is there a thread? Is there, and does God move in these stories? So let me go ahead and set up these rooms real quick. Hey, She, good to see you. I'm going to send you in a room as well. So you'll have 3 people in a room, and it really will be thinking about the women in these stories. So give me one more second. I'm going to give you about 10 minutes. Okay,
Thank you.
everybody. Click on those rooms and go on in.
Then
Welcome back. Okay, thoughts, reaction. What'd you come up with in your groups? Go ahead, Marie.
We blamed it on the writers.
Oh, that's fair.
Yep. Amen.
I pointed out what I thought was when the daughters raped their father. I
Yeah,
looked at that as they were pissed off at him and were going to show him up. And it was a very controlling power move on their part.
Okay.
well, and going back to that, Chris, again, Lot, Martha, you said was part of Judaism. And so when you look at, I looked at it, I thought, okay, all of Lot's descendants were illegitimate. I mean, they're from incest.
Yeah.
And it just mind-boggling.
Yeah.
Crazy.
If you take any of this literally, how in the world did we get from Adam and Eve to whole generations when all they had was sons, you know? So
Yeah.
it's another story that has not been explained, but it isn't all literal. Everything.
Well,
The other thing I was impressed, I know all these stories, but I've never sat down and read them in line like this, you know, and you realize. And the other thing is how much has been made out of that one line that Lot's wife turned to stone to him.
Yeah.
Holy cow, you know, that is a big deal. It's been made into a big deal.
A whole narrative about a woman that it's not there. You know, you say blame the writers, but I would say blame the commentators.
And we
Because-
also need Pastor Michael to do the women's version of a couple of these stories, please.
Yeah.
The women, you know, because these are all written by men. So let's have the women's side.
Okay, go
And
ahead,
Marcy,
Bernie.
I think you have an entire class that agrees with you when you were 16 that you don't understand Genesis.
Right. Right. Yeah. So I'll tell you another little story. I sit on a board of a social service agency in my town here, and I was helping them work through some issues. And one of them was sparked by a group of clergy in my town who are pressuring the school district about what they perceive to be their welcoming to trans students and causing fear for the normal students. These are the words that this group of clergy is using. And they actually cited the story of Sodom and Gomorrah as in a literal interpretation. So, you know, Mary Lee, you say we can't take them literally, right? We can't. But there's stories, of course there's stories, right? And there's stories written by lots of different people with lots of different agendas. These stories are being taken literally, and to the point where they are driving policy decisions in parts of our country. So these stories are being taken literally. So that's why I think biblical literalism, like biblical critical reading, is so critical. It's so important to be able to look at them and say, actually, you know what? That wasn't written by God. It was probably written by 3 different authors over 3 different time periods, you know. So that's why this stuff is so important, because the stories are being taken literally and they're being used as justification for policy in our country. So I'll get off my soapbox, but I
Don't
just,
stay there.
yesterday I saw this story quoted as a rationale from this group of ministers for a school board decision.
Well, yeah, I'd like to say then I think we'd have to take it literally that everything that was done at that point in time would be the way that we're supposed to live and act or eat or have housing, whatever, you know, nothing should have ever changed.
It's very much pick and choosing.
Yeah.
That's the same as the literalists in the Supreme Court, you know?
Yeah.
Well, everything was decided once and we have to live like that just because it's 200 years later.
Yeah,
So
I mean, we-
so next week, let me just wrap us up here in the interest of time. So next week, we're finishing Abraham's story. And we're gonna do 20 to 23. So just be forewarned for anybody who hasn't read ahead, this is the binding of Isaac. This is the sacrifice of Isaac story is in there. So we're gonna talk about it. We're gonna work it through. What you think the story is not the answer. It is not. That is not the answer. I will tell you right now, everything you thought you knew about that story is wrong. I'll be able to tell you what biblical scholars and archaeologists think the answer is to that story. Okay. So that's what we're taking on next week. Okay. 2023. Okay. I'll see you in a week, everyone. Thank you so
All
much.
right.
Thank you.
Thanks again.
Bye.
Thanks, Marcy.